Hi, hello, and welcome back to the channel. Today is Metal Friday, so that means we're gonna cover a metal band, and I decided to review and rank um, albums by a band that recently released an album that I actually talked about, and of course, that's Judas Priest, one of the pioneers of the genre of heavy metal music in general, one of the more influential bands, especially for new wave of British heavy metal. And I already talked about Invincible Shield, that was their 19 overall studio album, so that's astonishing. 50 years after Rocka Rolla, their debut, was released, so that's quite an accomplishment by them. I was actually never a big fan of Judas Priest back in the day when I was, elementary and high school. I was mostly into Iron Maiden, but I, of course, knew some of Judas Priest records and songs. But it wasn't until much later that I actually did a proper deep dive and listened to their whole discography. So they released 19 studio albums. The core band members were always Rob Halford on vocals, and their guitarist KK Downing and Glenn Tipton. Then we have Ian Hill, the bass player, and they mostly had problems with their drummers over the years. The first steady lineup of the band was in the late 70s and throughout the 80s when Dave Holland joined them for those 10 years. And after that, since he left the band, we have Scott Travis from who first was introduced on Painkiller, and he's still playing with the band. Only Glenn Tipton and Ian Hill were the only and are the only band members that appeared on every single Judas Priest record. So Rob Halford left the band in the 90s, and KK Downing left the band in, I believe, after Redeemer of Souls. So, without further ado, let's get this started. Okay, these last two albums, number 19 and number 18, they're for the most part the common ground for most Judas Priest fans that these are the weakest albums for the most part, and I'm gonna talk about them together, so joint, and that is my number 19 is Demolition from 2001, and my number 18 is Juggulator from 1997. And both of these albums were the only ones actually that were without Rob Halford, who left the band after touring Painkiller, and we have Team Ripper Owens doing vocals. I do not hate Team Ripper Owens one bit. I think he's a good singer, but he had the unfortunate luck to be in the band during this time, which was indeed uh, kind of a turbulent period for heavy metal music in general. And when Rob left the band, both KK and Glenn and Ian, they wanted to find a replacement for him, which was difficult. And they knew that Rob was integral part of the band and recognizable voice and his presence on stage. And in my opinion, they tried to kind of appeal to the metal audience at that time and try to do something different, something to stay relevant, I guess. But unfortunately, the songwriting is not good on any of these records, and this has nothing to do with Ripper Owens at all. I mean, he wasn't included in the songwriting process, so most of the songs, almost all of them, were written by KK Downing and Glenn Tipton. And I don't know, for Demolition, since it's my number 19, this is a heavier version of Juggulator, and Owens sounds really good here. I watched a couple of live shows from that period on YouTube, and the band was pretty tight, and he sounded really good. But the songs from these albums are not good. Um, they're not interesting. They're not inspired. They're bland, and they down-tune their guitars to sound more chuggy. Especially Demolition has a more new metal kind of vibe to it, and I'm not the biggest fan of new metal in general. Um, both of these records are really long, and almost all songs they all kind of go for way too long. I mean, some of these songs are 7, 8, 9 minutes long, and it is way too much of that same chuggy riff over and over again. And especially Demolition is way too long. It's over 70 minutes. Uh, the influence of new metal are strong with this one, and it's just bad. Um, Thankfully, the Demolition was the last one they've done something like that. I mean, they tried to experiment a bit later in their career, but that kind of worked in my opinion, so I'm going to talk about it soon enough. But this one, not so much. So Demolition in general, I have at 2 stars. Juggulator, on the other hand, I think it's a bit better in my opinion. It's not terrible album, and it's obvious that especially Juggulator was influenced by trend at the time, more groovier sound, down-tuned guitars to sound more like Pantera, and that part was solidly done here. But this is just not Judas Priest for me. The songs, like I said, are way too long and boring, and the only song I kind of always liked, even though it's way too long, it's Burning Hell. And What I don't like about Tim Ripper Owens and his singing, his tendency to emulate other singers, other than Rob Halford, that is. Like, for example, there is a part on Bloodstained from Juggulator, some parts of the songs that on which he sounds almost identical like Lane Staley from Alice in Chains, and I'm not sure why was he doing that. I mean, I can only guess why, but I don't know. Both these records, yes, they're heavy, really heavy, maybe the heaviest albums they ever done, but it's just boring. So, Juggulator, I will have at 2.5 stars. Okay, my number 17 may be controversial for some, but this is where it lands for me. Redeemer of Souls from 2014, I have it 3 stars. And while I think Nostradamus, their previous effort, was an ambitious departure from anything they had done, Redeemer of Souls is opposite of that. Due to fans not liking Nostradamus, they went back in the studio, this time without KK Downing, who left the band, and this was the first album with Richie Faulkner, and they recorded, to my ears at least, a generic Judas Priest record. Don't like it when it first came out, and now after listening to it again, I have the same feelings towards it. Kind of generic, and in my opinion, uninspired record. I don't feel the spark that shaped some of their biggest records. This album to me sounds like they thought, well, fans did not like their our previous album, Nostradamus, and that album they actually put some effort in and they were inspired to do something different. This one is, like I said, Judas Priest on autopilot. Don't get me wrong, there are some good songs here. It is not a bad record by any means, just it feels forced to me. The production is awful, just awful. It is like they recorded this album in, I don't know, in a well or something. It just sounds bad. Um, some of the songs feel like a generic copy paste of their previous efforts, like Redeemer of Souls and Hell and Back. But there are some, like I said, there are tracks that I can find enjoyable, even if the production kind of ruins those songs a bit as well. The production on Metalizer is god awful. Like I said, like they recorded it on phone. And that song I think could be much better with a better production. Dragonaut and Halls of Valhalla are standouts for me, so it is barely 3 stars, and I know that people like that they kind of shifted away from the thing they've done on Nostradamus. But like I said, this feels uninspired, forced, and the production is just lame, so 3 stars. At number 16, I have Point of Entry from 1981. And as the album title suggests, this was supposed to be a point of entry for to new Judas Priest fans and listeners. Following the enormous success of British Steel, they ventured even more towards more commercial, radio-friendly sound, which, to be honest, I don't mind at all. If the songwriting can keep up with that, I don't mind any kind of commercial sound or change in their sound. Just wait for my Megadeth rankings video and you're gonna hear what I'm talking about. But unfortunately, even for a 37-minute album, it feels like an eternity to listen to. Too many filler tracks here, and the cheese factor is strong with this one. Not as embarrassing as some of the other songs from other records I'm gonna talk about, but tracks like You Say Yes, Troubleshooter, and All the Way are a bit head scratching, to say at least. But I do really like the first half of the record. Desert Plains is a song I can freely say is in my top 10 Judas Priest tracks. I just adore that song. I think it's a way, way underrated song. And I was really glad they started to play that one live on their recent tours. So, thumbs up. Solar Angel is another similar track to Desert Plains. It has a similar vibe as well. It's a really enjoyable track. And my biggest problem outside some of the songs that are kind of weak is lack of, how can I say this, a lack of vocal variety. I mean, if something can be said about Judas Priest, something recognizable for Judas Priest is definitely Rob's vocals, and he has a great range, and some of his vocal performances on previous records and later records and even today are immaculate and great and interesting. But on this record in particular, it doesn't showcase that at all. It's very one note. And that is maybe my biggest problem with this record. So I cannot go more than 3 stars for it. At number 15, I have their debut record, Rocka Rolla from 1974, and this album doesn't sound like the classic Priest we all know and love, and that's the main reason fans kind of diss this album, which is funny to me. If that's their main reason, it doesn't sound like Priest. Yeah, but it was their debut record, so they had to start from somewhere, and they evolved from that sound, even though on their next record they released 2 years later. So for a debut record, I think it's a pretty solid record. It is more classic rock, hard rock feel to it, more bluesy, with a hints and psychedelia and progressive rock. And that's the thing with this record. It feels unfocused, so they still trying to figure out what they want to do and what kind of sound they're gonna pursue. And so this is why we have this wide mix of genres on it, and maybe this is the main reason it wasn't a big success back in the day. It wasn't a success at all, basically. During this time, band was even scared if they'll make it to the second album. Even though it is not my favorite record, I still do think there are some really good songs here, like the title track, Never Satisfied, and Run of the Mill, which is a more epic, longer track on the album. It is an interesting album. Was produced by Roger Bain, who worked on the first 3 Black Sabbath records, and you can tell that Black Sabbath was one of their major influences, alongside some Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple. Uh, Rob sounds, even here on the debut record, he sounds really good, and I don't see this being a bad record by Judas Priest one bit. I think it is completely fine for a debut record. I mean, it's not as groundbreaking, definitely, as Black Sabbath debut record was, but it was okay. So I have it at high 3 stars. My number 14 may be a controversial pick for some because I know many people have this album dead last, but not me. I do enjoy this album. I think it's fine, and that is Nostradamus from 2008. Judas Priest writing a concept album about Nostradamus is something I never thought I'll hear in my life, but here we are. I remember when this came out, people had really mixed feelings about it and they hated it. I understand people not liking it, But to tell you the truth, even though it doesn't feel like a Judas Priest record, I respect them for trying something interesting, and I'll defend this album, albeit it won't be on my top 10 Judas Priest records, but I think it's in a way underrated record for them. My biggest issue was the length, of course. It is over 100 minutes, almost 2 hours, 23 songs with a bunch of interludes, but that's the case with most long concept records. This one is somewhere in the middle of the pack for me at least. It has its moments. The songs themselves are, at least some of them, are way too long. They meander a lot and don't go anywhere. And the lyrics, well, they never had, let me say it like this, they never had a great lyrics, but they worked for what they were going for. That was never an issue for me. But they never tried to sound serious. But this time around, they try to sound serious, and some of the lyrics are, I don't know, are far from good and contain a bunch of melodramatic cliches. But I appreciate the effort. They added orchestral and more symphonic elements, bunch of interludes with choirs, which is unlike anything they've done up to that point. So kudos to that. This is definitely an album I don't often reach out to if I want to hear some Priest, but from time to time, if I'm in the mood for it, I'm gonna put it on. There are a bunch of songs here that I do really love, like Prophecy, Visions, Revelations, Alone, Future of Mankind, and the title track, especially. I think the title track is fantastic, it's great. Pestilence and Plague, for example, feels like a symphonic power metal song to me, something like Nightwish would write, not Judas Priest. And at times there are interludes and songs that feel like a video game soundtrack to me as well. But strangely enough, I find it interesting. I find it engaging in a way, and even though it's way too long and the lyrics are not my favorite, and I think it's in a way underrated, so I'll have this one at 3.5 stars. Number 13, we have the comeback record. Comeback in a way that Rob Halford is back, and that is Angel of Retribution from 2005. So, after a while, Rob Halford is finally back, and band feels rejuvenated once more. I was really glad that he's back, but let me tell you right off from the start, this ain't no Brave New World type of thing. Unfortunately, I think um, it is much better than Demolition and Juggulator, but it has its flaws and it's not even close to the quality of Brave New World, for me at least. It opens up with a fantastic song, Judas Rising, and what a way to reintroduce Rob Halford to audience once more. This song screams Painkiller to me, with Rob's maniac performance, once again blistering solos, dual guitars, and songs now feel like actual Judas Priest songs. And the only song here that is kind of out of place is the closing track, Loch Ness, which is unnecessarily long. It's like almost over 13 minutes and it meanders a lot, not going anywhere. So I think that song, I mean, I don't hate it. I kind of dig it, but it's way too long and kind of out of place on this whole record. And we have Roy Z here doing the production. And you may know Roy Z with his work with Bruce Dickinson, especially, but he actually did work with Rob Halford on his solo work as well. So this is another similar thing with Iron Maiden and Judas Priest. So that Roy Z connection since he both worked with Bruce Dickinson on his solo album after he left Iron Maiden, and we have him working with Rob Halford as well on his solo records. And we have a couple of songs here that I'm not the biggest fan of. For example, I'm gonna name one that is Revolution. It is basically a worse version of Mountain Song by Jane's Addiction. So it's kind of weird because, you know, it's clearly a rip-off, that riff and the way the song goes. I'm not sure about that one, and it was actually the only single from this record. Deal with the Devil is a song that has Roy Z on it, and it is a solid, fast-paced rocker. Hellrider and Demonizer are more heavier track, while Wheels of Fire feel a bit generic. Overall, I think this album is a solid comeback record, but like I said, not on the same level as Brave New World was for Iron Maiden. Overall, it is fine, enjoyable experience, much better than the previous two, so this one I have at 3.5 stars. Okay, this may be my most controversial pick, but I don't care. I stand by it. My number 12 is British Steel from 1980. To me, this is Judas Priest's most overrated album by far. It is nowhere near as good as some of the 70s stuff and some of the later stuff as well. This album continued the trend started on Killing Machine with even more commercial sound, with more arena rock tracks and lyrics that are not as dark as they were on some of their previous efforts. This was also the first album to feature a new drummer, Dave Holland. And yes, this album is a big album for them because it was their commercial breakthrough, and I'm glad that they received the praise and recognition they deserved. But unfortunately, to me, they got the recognition and praise for the wrong album. I don't get me wrong. I still think this album is good, but it's not perfect or it's not a masterpiece by any means. I mean, it still contains some great songs like Rapid Fire, Rage, Stealer, and even Breaking the Law, which I think is quite an iconic track. But on the other hand, we have Living After Midnight, a song that I never cared about and at all, and I know that's their live staple. They always close the show with Living After Midnight. Don't care about it. They've done this type of song much better on Screaming for Vengeance, and I'm gonna talk about it when I come to that album, which is not gonna be soon. And this album also has songs, forgettable songs like You Don't Have to Be Old to Be Wise, Metal Gods, which I don't care about, and has a song called United, which I actively hate, and I hate this type of songs they tend to do on these 80s records to put this arena rocker. I don't know. I hate these kind of songs, those arena rock cheesy tracks with cringy lyrics, and this song is annoying as hell. And I don't know. I really like the production. The production is good. The playing is good, but the songs, it is kind of a mixed bag for me. A couple of tracks that are great, the ones that I mentioned, and bunch of others that I don't like and even hate, like United. So I cannot go more than 3.5 stars for this because I feel they've done much better in the 70s, and there are some later albums that I think are better than British Steel. So yeah, 3.5 stars for British Steel. Number 11, I have another controversial pick because this album is mostly on people's list, you know, towards the bottom, and that is Turbo from 1986. And this is one of the most hated records, but in truth, this album is pretty solid for the most part. That is, it also has its bad moments and songs like United this time around is Rock You All Around the World, another arena rocker, but this one is maybe a bit better than United, but not by much. Anyway, after two more heavier albums, Judas Priest decided to make a more streamlined commercial record. In fact, this album was supposed to be a double album called Twin Turbos, one side being more commercial and the other more heavier, but that was scrapped and instead we got a more commercial sounding Turbo. I totally understand why people hate this record. That 80s cheese is through the roof here, but for the most part, I think it works. Some of the tracks here are catchy as hell, like the opening track Turbo Lover. I love it. It's staple on their live shows, and to be honest with you, I always love that song. It has nice vibe, and it is really atmospheric, and those synths are great. Locked In is another great song here, another banger. The guitar synths are even more apparent, catchy as hell. And then we get to three weaker tracks, my least favorite tracks: Private Property, Parental Guidance, and already mentioned Rock You All Around the World. Thankfully, the album picks up uh, on side 2, opening with a great synth driven track that feels epic in a way, Out in the Cold. Great vocal performance by Rob, and I know they played this song live recently, which was great. Tur- uh, Besides Turbo Lover, my second favorite song from this record. Wild Night, Hot and Crazy Days is kind of a generic song that I'm not that crazy about. But the last two tracks here are great, catchy and fun. Hot for Love and Reckless. I always had a soft spot for this one, and this is why I have it this high and over albums like British Steel. But I find this album quite interesting, and that 80s cheese and this and the synths and everything, I think it works. I think it works a lot here, and I have it at 3.5 stars. At number 10, I have their, in my opinion, way underrated and way overhated album, and that is Ram It Down from 1988. This album is was supposed to be a second disc of their Twin Turbos project, and at least four songs were written for that specific project, and the songs that made their way on this album, and that is the title track, Ram It Down, Hard as Iron, Love You to Death, and Monsters of Rock. Both Ram It Down and Heavy Metal, which opened the record, are heavy, they're fast, full of great energy, some great twin guitar action by KK and Glenn, and soloing is through the roof here. My biggest problem with this album, besides a couple of tracks that I'm gonna mention, is actually the drumming. It feels really bland and pretty generic and uninspiring. Uh, Dave played drums from 1979, and he had his moments. I think he played really good on British Steel, Screaming for Vengeance, Defenders of the Faith, and all these records. And it was said that he even couldn't deliver on some of these songs. They had to use drum machines to fill his place. So this was the last album to feature him. So they're gonna fix the drummer issue soon after this album was recorded by hiring Scott Travis on Painkiller, and by far their best drummer, and he still plays with the band in the band. But that was my biggest problem with this record. And of course, we have song we have to talk about. I mean, you cannot talk about Ram It Down without mentioning Johnny B. Good. Instant skip for me. The only thing this song has with the original Chuck Berry songs are the lyrics, but that's not the problem, since Judas Priest really knew how to make a cover sound different and unique and original, like they did with Diamonds and Rust, for example, or Green Manalishi, which to me are a better version of the original. But this song is just, I don't know, totally forgettable and skippable. My only skippable song from this album. I just don't know what they were trying to do, to be honest. Um, we have, like I said, this is a heavier album, much heavier than Turbo, and songs like Hard as Iron kind of foreshadows what's to come on Painkiller. It is really fast and furious, and I think they use drum machine on this song in particular. It is way different than some of the other songs here. We have Blood Red Skies, another highlight from this record. Great vocal performance by Rob. A truly epic track, and the biggest highlight from Ram It Down. It's great. Songs like I'm a Rocker and Love You to Death are forgettable, and the closing track, Monsters of Rock, feels like a more Black Sabbath type of song, uh, almost like a doom metal song, but it's way too long for what it is, and hence kind of ending the album on a lower note. But overall, I find this album quite enjoyable listen, and I have it at 3.5 stars. At number 9, I have Killing Machine from 1978, and this album feels like a big step down from Almost Perfect Stay in Class, which came out just a couple of months earlier in the same year. But even though it's a step down, I find this album pretty solid throughout. It does rock. There are some great songs. Delivering the Goods is a solid opener, but not as good as Exciter was. It's not as visceral or intense as that song was, but still a solid opener. Hellbent for Leather is a classic, and that was the title of the album in US and Canada. For some reason, they thought the Killing Machine title is extreme or whatever. There is one song here that foreshadows my biggest problem with some of the Priest records. I already mentioned a couple of those tracks on like United on British Steel, and it all kind of started with this song called "Take on the World." My God, I hate it. This song is bad. It is arena rock sing along type of song with some really bad lyrics, and it's really cheesy, and it really ruins otherwise a really solid album. And they're gonna do, like I already mentioned, a similar thing on later records as well. Sometimes it's gonna be better, sometimes it's gonna be worse, but not as bad as Take on the World, which sucks big time. And maybe my biggest problem with this record is that song. I really hated it. To me, this album feels like a transitional record. It is more between a more heavier Judas Priest record, Stained Glass era, and more commercial arena rock album that is British Steel. I think that the side two on this record is much better than the first half. The run from Burning Up to Evil Fantasies is great. The Green Militia that I already mentioned is yet another Priest cover song that I think sounds better than the original version. The title track is the closest we get to Stained Glass sound, and Before the Dawn is another good example of a nice ballad they actually know how to do. Overall, I think this album is pretty solid, especially that second half is almost flawless, but the songwriting is not as good as it was on Stained Glass, and of course, Take on the World sucks. So 3.5 stars for this one, high 3.5 stars. And this is, I think, my last 3.5 stars record. So everything from 8 to 1 is 4 and up. And number 8, this is my first 4-star Judas Priest record, and that is Firepower from 2018. And now we're talking. What a comeback record this late in their careers. I mean, comeback. This is their 18th overall studio album. Unbelievable. Much better album than Redeemer of Souls. And first thing I have to mention is the production. This time around, this album was produced by Andy Sneap, and the production is immaculate. It is great. It is crisp. It is clear, and it is a greatly produced metal album, heavy metal album in 2010s. It sounds really good. The band sounds energized. Rob sounds amazing, like he's 20, not almost 70 at this point. Richie Faulkner and Glenn shine here as well. Then, of course, we have to mention the bass playing by Ian, who is always there from the first album up until this point, playing along, chugging along, doing some great stuff as always. And you can hear that the band was inspired to make this record. They want to make a proper metal album, and they nail it in every way. This album feels like an improvement over lackluster Redeemer of Souls. It opens up with fearsome three-track combo of Firepower, Lightning Strike, and Evil Never Dies, where especially on Evil Never Dies, Rob is screaming and screeching like he's in his 30s, not he's in his 60s. So amazing achievement for him and the band to sound this good this late in their careers. And we have some more melodic elements on this album as well, more catchier songs. It's not everything. It's not one note here. We have Never the Heroes and Rising from Ruins with some nice choruses. Spectre is a more mid-tempo song with great chorus as well. Same goes with No Surrender. My only complaint I have is the length. The album feels a bit bloated, especially the last two tracks, Lone Wolf and Sea of Red, while not bad, are a bit more forgettable tracks, and I think the album would be much more cohesive listen without those two. And a great return to form this late in their careers, and this is strong 4-star record for me. Great stuff. At number 7, I have Invincible Shield, their latest album from 2024. I already talked about it on my previous video, so I'm not gonna go in length talking about this again, but I just gonna say this album is basically Firepower Part 2, a bit better in my opinion. I know some people tend to like Firepower more, which is fine. Uh, this one feels in similar fashion like that album, but with a bit more uh, better songwriting, in my opinion. And it is freaking amazing. I mean, 19 studio album, Rob and Glenn in their 70s. I believe Rob and Glenn are like 72 now. And they kick so much ass here, especially Rob. He sounds bloody amazing. Once again, the album is produced by Andy Sneap, and once again, everything sounds amazing. The playing is top notch, especially Richie Faulkner shines here. The songs are fast, they're ferocious, even more than on Firepower, especially on the opening track, Panic Attack. I mean, Rob screaming about wild neurotic memes. It is fun. It is a great track. Then we go to another fast song like Serpent and the King, the title track, another more speedier, more speed metal track. Rob sounds menacing on it, especially. Things kind of slow down a bit on Devil in Disguise and Gates of Hell. More groovier, mid-tempo-ish song. Gates of Hell is really melodic with a really catchy and melodic chorus. I already talked about Crown of Horse when I talked about Invincible Shield on my previous video, so I'm just gonna say that it's still my least favorite of the record. But by looking through this whole discography once more, this song is actually good compared to songs like United, Take on the World, and that crap. I had this album initially at 4.5 stars. I mean, it still is high 4. I mean, because when I compare it to the rest of their discography and when I put it in place, it doesn't feel like a 4.5 Judas Priest record because they have uh, it can be in the same level as some of the stuff that I have ahead of it. So I have to go with 4 stars, but it is incredible and astonishing that the band this late in their careers put out the album of this quality. So kudos to them once more. 4 stars, so really strong 4 stars for Invincible Shield. At number 6, I have their 1977 album, Sin After Sin. This album started to sound like heavy metal, as we can hear in the opening track Sinner and tracks like Dissident Aggressor. And this album feels like a Judas Priest thing, their unique sound that the other bands will try to emulate. Also, I have to mention that Diamonds and Rust is a fantastic, fantastic cover. They did their own thing with it, and it sounds way different than the original. And in my opinion, it's a better version, even though I like the original, but I prefer the cover version by Judas Priest. Dissident Aggressor is often considered as a big influence on thrash metal genre, alongside Symptoms of the Universe by Black Sabbath, and that song in particular was covered by a thrash metal band Slayer, and great song. Let Us Pray, Call the Priest, Foreshadows new wave of British heavy metal. And the only song here on this whole record that I find kind of generic, and it is my least favorite song on this album, is The Last Rose of Summer. It is a ballad. Usually Priest knows how to do this kind of ballad. I mean, it's not bad or terrible or anything, just I just don't feel it. I think they've done better ballads in the future and even on the previous record, Sad Winds of Destiny. And I think in general that Sin After Sin is really underrated Priest record, and this is maybe the last record they sound like Deep Purple and or Led Zeppelin. Those kind of influences, they started to make their own thing, their own sound. So yeah, Sin After Sin, 4 stars, really strong 4 stars as well. At number five, I have their 1984 release, Defenders of the Faith. This is an album that is near and dear to my heart. I really love it. It's stylistically very similar to its predecessor, Scream for Vengeance, but it's not as tight as that album. There are some songs here that feel filler to me, but overall, a great album featuring some of classic Priest stuff like Free Will Burning and my favorite Sentinel that has more progressive elements and more dynamic and interesting song. Some Heads Are Gonna Roll has a similar vibe to You Got Another Thing Coming, but it's not as memorable as that song from Scream for Vengeance. Also, I have to mention once again, and maybe the main reason I have this album on number five, and my least favorite song from this record is another arena rocker sing along track on Rock Hard Ride Free. It is my least favorite from this record, but at least is not as embarrassing as some of the other track. It's actually solid enough. It is heavier and the chorus doesn't feel as cheesy as the others I previously mentioned, but still not my favorite. The guitar soloing on the Sentinel is amazing, and the way Rob screams in the chorus never gets old. Songs like Eat Me Alive have some more, let's say, interesting lyrics, sexually tense lyrics, but I don't mind it at all. I find that song quite interesting and engaging. Once again, Prince showed how to make a proper good metal ballad. This time around, we have Night Comes Down with Halford's dynamic vocal range that make you enthralled. Love Bites is another more slower mid-tempo song with a creepy synth intro. It feels almost vampiric, and it could actually fit perfectly for some kind of a vampire horror movie. The album closes with Heavy Duty Defenders of the Fate combo, which is similar to songs like United from British Steel, but with better execution. This is definitely an essential Judas Priest record, and I highly, highly recommended it, and I have it at 4.5 stars. At number four, I have Stained Class from 1978, so the same year Killing Machine was released, but this one is much better, cohesive record than Killing Machine or even British Steel was. This album feels like the improved version of Sin After Sin to me. It is that more recognizable Judas Priest sound. Slowly, they ditched the bluesy influence and ventured even more to the heavier sound of hard rock, since heavy metal wasn't a term used back then. And this album is another example of how groundbreaking it was for the development of heavy metal. Just listen to the opening track, Exciter, a relentless 6 minute song with a double bass opening, Rob screaming throughout and heavy guitar throughout. It is a precursor and birth of thrash and speed metal, in my opinion. You can hear the bands like Metallica, Slayer, and Megadeth were heavily influenced by this record and this song in particular. Fun fact, this is the first Judas Priest album that contains their recognizable logo, and in a way it's fitting since this album to me feels like the true Priest we know from the 80s. Besides heavy tracks, this album contains one of their best, more mid-tempo songs, Epic, Beyond the Realm of Death. To me, a perfect song. It's heavy, it is intense, it's dynamic, it's interesting. Even the cover song Better You, Better Than Me feels like its own thing here. It fits perfectly, and to me, a better version than the original. I know there was some controversy regarding that song. They were even on court, but that's all nonsense. The only song here that I'm not that excited about, since it kind of ruins the flow for me, is Invader. It's not as intense as the rest of the tracks. It's much more groovier song. I mean, it's not bad, but to me it feels out of place on this record. Rob and the rest of the bands here sounds amazing. It's not as highly regarded and talked about as British Steel, for example, which is, I don't know, this album is much better than British Steel. High 4.5 stars, really close to 5, but because of some of the weaker moments, like I mentioned, I have to go with 4.5 stars. At number 3, I have an album that was my number 1 for a very, very long time, but now I have it at number 3. I still do love it, and this is Sad Wings of Destiny from 1976. And what an improvement over debut in every way. Both KK Downing and Glenn started to shine here and showcase their ability. Some great riffs, double guitar leads to accompany Rob's amazing vocal performance, which is especially evident on songs like Dreamer Deceiver, his best vocal performance in my opinion. The way he hits those high notes is amazing, and the change that this album is over the debut is apparent from the get-go, from the beginning, when you hear Victim of Changes, my personal favorite Judas Priest song. It wasn't a commercial success back in the day, but over the years it became a seminal album in their discography and highly influential album that inspired many metal bands from the 80s. Songs like Tyrant and Deceiver were influential, and that twin guitar action inspired future bands like Iron Maiden and Metallica and contributed to the development of speed metal. Besides heavier tracks here, we have to mention more ballad type of songs like Epitaph, which sounds beautiful. And I have to mention the lyrics. Some of these lyrics are really good, especially on songs like already mentioned Dreamer Deceiver. I definitely prefer 70s Priest lyrics over their later stuff, which at times can be really cheesy. This album marks the beginning of their unique sound as well, slowly ditching more bluesy influence from the debut, and they're gonna continue that on Sin After Sin. But truly, they started their develop their that recognizable Judas Priest sound on already mentioned Stained Class. So I have this one at high 4.5 stars. And we have two albums to go. So, as soon as I pushed Sad Wings of Destiny as my number 1, there could be only one album to rule them all to be number 1, and that is, of course, Painkiller. So, my number 2 is Screaming for Vengeance from 1982. 1 year after Point of Entry, we get this fantastic album that should be a great point of entry if you never heard Judas Priest, not Point of Entry, the album. It contains a bit of everything. We have heavy Priest and a more commercial sounding Priest, but the main difference here being that the songwriting here is top notch. You have a great variety of faster and heavier tracks and more mid tempo songs, and they're all good and interesting. Rob finally let his voice go wild here, and what a breath of fresh air after Point of Entry. As soon as it opens with Helion Electric Eye, you know what to expect. This album contains the intensity of Stained Class, more catchier elements of British Steel, but done better. Just listen to You Got Another Thing Coming, the most radio friendly track on here, and compare it to Living After Midnight. By example, this one is better executed by a lot. It's a better song overall. And the most interesting thing about it, it was the last addition to the album. And it was the most successful track from this record. The title track is wild, Rob screeching throughout like he did on Exciter. The intensity is there. The guitar work from KK and Glenn is tremendous. Everything works here, not a single dud from top to bottom, an enjoyable listen, and one of the best metal albums of the 80s. And thank God, no more cheesy tracks like Take on the World United or You Say Yes. All killer, no filler. Fever is a dynamic and most interesting track on this whole album. It starts slow and mellow, then it goes heavy and then shifts again. Devil's Child is another highlight and a fantastic way to finish this album. It's energetic and it's more aligned to the first couple of tracks. Easy 5, but not better, in my opinion, than my number 1, which is, of course, Painkiller from 1990. We already mentioned that um, Holland had problems with keeping up with guitars and songwriting, so they had to use drum machines. So he left the band in 1989. And what a way to fill up that position with a great, great drummer that is Scott Travis, who previously was a member of Racer X. And what a change in their sound. He brought so much to the band, they feel revamped here. Totally different Judas Priest. He gave Judas Priest a new, more heavier sound that becomes apparent from the first couple of seconds when the title track kicks in, with maybe the best drum intro ever. Prominent use of double kicks really elevated this album to a whole new level. What can I say? It's 1990, and this is another Blue album cover supremacy. Second favorite metal album from 1990 for me, after another Blue album cover, Flawless Rust in Peace by Megadeth. And after two kind of lackluster album, you could say, Ram It Down and Turbo, we get this astonishing album that is Painkiller. This whole album goes hard and never stops. The only breather we have here is Touch of Evil, which is more slow-paced and eerie uh, song with some great keyboards, and it really enhances the atmosphere on it, and it's really good with a great chorus on it, great solo as well. And that iconic album cover, everything about this album is iconic. The production is great, the performances are tight and epic, from Halford screeching on the title track to intense twin guitar work, and of course the godly performance by Scott Travis. Ian Hill is of course there in the back. The bass is not that prominent on most of their records, but here you can hear how tight it sounds. The sheer intensity of these songs make this album more of a speed metal album than heavy metal. To me, this is the best Judas Priest album. Nothing comes even close to this. It is ferocious, fast, and unhinged. It has it all bangers. I can't simply highlight one song, but if I had to, I would pick beside the majestic title track, A Touch of Evil, Nightcrawler, Hell Patrol, and one of the better metal albums of the 90s. Fantastic stuff, so easy 5 stars, of course. So, I'm I'm hoping that you enjoy this review and ranking. Please do share your rankings of if you have them, and tell me what's your favorite Judas Priest record, what's your least favorite Judas Priest record. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.